What's up, party people? Hope your summer's going well. Hope this class putting isn't cramping your style. Say that. Um, Hopefully you're finding this course a nice summer companion, right? You go have fun at night, and then you work your brain a little bit in the day. I don't know. All right, so there's a lot to talk about. I'm backed up. Um, so I'm going to talk about Michael Che today, and then Amy Schumer. I'll find some time to get that in. Um, because I think there's a lot of I like showing in this case Michael Che and Amy Schumer because they're so different, right? White, black, man, woman, just completely different approaches uh, to the form. So I do want to get to Schumer, but I won't be in this video. So skipping back to Michael Che, uh, just a few things about stand up in general. I'm a firm believer in the idea that stand up's the purest art form, right? I may have mentioned this. Um, but a person alone with their only equipped with their thoughts and their wit and their um, you know personality, and in front of in in this case a live audience, right? um, and someone brought it up. Who brought it up? Looking at my notes here. um, Kellen brought up this idea of in his comment about kind of the interactivity of stand up, how it's the ebb and flow, how a lot of it is the energy of it is happening in real time, right? A joke, a joke pops, comedian kind of sits in that and leans into it and will ad lib something and add onto it, and it's constantly changing, and then a joke maybe doesn't you know go where he or she is thinking it's going to go, and they kind of they try to recover and steer off, and as you know as rehearsed as a lot of comedians are, right, there's always that element of interactivity, um, and that is a unique thing that for an artist to experience, right? And try to think like where else can you have that kind of relationship? I guess music, maybe, but um, it just lacks that intimacy, and you have the security of the instruments in the band and things like that. So stand up to me is the purest art form, and I wish more people acknowledged it as such. Um, but what are you gonna do? I'm not gonna complain about it. Um, you know, and all these things tied with it. We're just talking about in Kellen's comment, and a bunch of your comments talk about it. Um, it's I mentioned it probably in my intro video. Like it's sorry, their comedians are allowed to say more than just the average person. In fact, they're supposed to say more. It's their job to say more. Um, and they're generally doing it in a stringless environment. No strings attached. Nobody's pulling their strings. Oh, you can't say this. You can't say this. And you need to push. You know, you need to push this agenda. It's all their own thoughts and ideas and things like that. That's refreshing in a culture where we're constantly being pitched to and constantly being, um, you know, trying to, we're constantly being persuaded, right, for in many cases nefarious reasons, persuaded to think certain ways, to buy certain things, to do, to live our lives and believe, you know, things that maybe aren't in our best interest. Um, so, yeah, the best stand-up comedians, I think, are they. Maybe this isn't individual comedians, but I think it's inherent to the genre itself is right seeking truth, asking questions, humility. Like these are all great qualities, human qualities that our culture over the last, I don't know, 50 years, maybe less, have not promoted or valued in any way. I mean, look at the state of our country right now. Like, I would argue that we are where we are. Not maybe not primarily, but the lack of humility in our culture has led to this. I mean, think about like Trump. Trump's the least humble person, maybe of all time, and you know, it's no surprise. It's really no surprise. It shouldn't have come as any surprise that he won the presidency because our culture has moved away from humility and vulnerability and empathy and all these kinds of things in our quest to win, you know, and be right. Anyway, I'm getting off track here. Let me get into um, the specifics. So I feel like Michael Che is kind of like under the radar as a stand-up comedian. I don't think a lot of people ever. If you know him, you probably know him from SNL. Um, but he obviously started as a stand-up, and it's good. Um, but he embodies kind of what this course is about, right? And some of those things I was mentioning before, right? He's controversial, but he's not offensive. You know, he's looking for, I think, different ways to different perspectives on these issues that we're kind of so entrenched in. It's easy to get entrenched in your beliefs and just be like, this is what I believe, because as I mentioned in previous videos, like our culture has spent more time dividing us up into sides, right? Picking sides is the most important thing you can do for some reason, right? And generally there are only two. Comedy, I think, is looking for more sides, I guess. Um, but he's sensitive, he's thought provoking, he's funny, um, he's honest. Like, these are all things that I think this course is about. I'm gonna try not to murder one of my dogs during this video. You can hear them barking for no reason. So I just have these random things I jotted down. So in this special, Che is bringing you controversy in a nice package, right? Which is kind of what I was talking about before in my video about the airplane, comedies, basketball, or whatever, right? It's controversy in this sort of nice. It's a nice little present. Everyone loves a present. It's in this nice little package, kind of wrapped up. It's not, you know, people screaming at each other, and it's listening, and it's this sort of, negotiating controversy with comedy is kind of what he does really well in this special, and a lot of comedians do it. Good comedians are doing it. So I'm about to scream at these fucking dogs. Okay. I don't know. So yeah, it's controversy without being offensive, right? He's not screaming at you. I don't think the he's talking about controversial things, but I don't think he's taking a controversial stance, if that makes any sense. Um, so it's without being offensive. I think it's, again, I think a lot of the things he talks about are very divisive. Now, whether we've made them more divisive as a culture because we're shitty is out is beside the point. Um, but again, it's access to ideas, right? I think watching something like this is more apt to bring in, to make it less divisive, or at least the discussion less divisive. Um, and he's not confrontational at all. I feel like he's trying to work through it as much as any of us are, or his audience, or whoever it is. And there's something refreshing about that and honest about that I think resonates with people. And there's also, I was just mentioning before how we're in us versus them culture. Every issue, every idea is broken down into us versus them. Well, you're either with us or against us, love it or leave it, da 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 da. And that's fucking primitive and archaic ways to think. It's tribalism, basically. Um, and that's all removed from this, this experience of his special. Um, it's more about, for me, understanding humanity. Like, period. Like, isn't that kind of what this whole thing is about? And by whole thing, I mean just life. It's like understanding humanity. Like, people who generally want to understand otherness, like things that are different, are generally, you know, we'd be better off if more people just, not even agree with, just understand otherness, right? Understand blackness, Asianness, gayness, whatever it is, right? But just understand it. You don't have to agree with it, but at least understand it. And that's, for me, and I hope you guys are developing this, because it would mean my class is worthwhile in some way. Like, comedians are seeking understanding. Like, I think that's something that comedy pushes for, or is invested in. Our understanding of each other and the world around us, or a more intimate understanding of it. So I mentioned before, right, stand-ups allowed to speak more freely about things like Black Lives Matter and transgender rights and, you know, all the kinds of things that Che is talking about. So they're allowed to speak freely, more freely than, say, you know, you or I, or a politician, or it's almost in the job description for them to do that. Um, and by the same token, I would argue they're supposed to say more. If a comedian isn't approaching these controversial, controversial, I hate that word, but these sort of meaningful topics, like why are you even doing it, right? Um, they're allowed to say more. They're supposed to say more. So, I think Chappelle talks about this. Like, people going to see a comedian and getting offended just is not logical. It doesn't make any sense. Like, that's not what's happening here. If that is the case, then you're looking for it, right? You're looking to be offended and make a scene and, whatever it is. Like, we're supposed to do this because we're allowed to say more. We have more leeway, culturally speaking. That's, that's powerful. Um, so if you think about stand up in this way, right, the person who can say the most, the comedian, is then paired with, in most situations or in ideal situations, is coupled with the people who are more open, right? We talked about this. Comedy audiences are inherently sort of more open to hearing differences of opinion or different ideas, because they're in this comedy setting, right? So they kind of, like I talked about before, they let their guard down. They're more mentally engaged, I think, because they're trying to follow the jokes and get the jokes and all these kinds of things. You have to be sort of, cognitively acrobatic to do that. You can't zone out or you won't understand. So, like, you know what I'm saying? Um, like, that's such a unique relationship. It's like the person who can say the most, the comedian, paired with people who are open to or more open to hearing different ideas and differences of opinion. It's a perfect combination for discourse and change if you think about that, right? Like, where else do you get that setting? A lot of times in a lecture situation, like if some expert on race is giving a lecture, that room is filled with people who are either disciples of this person or, you know, just looking. The echo chamber is real, right? And our news system and the way our culture works is this sort of confirmation bias and things like that. And I think comedians operate outside of that, maybe not entirely, but more than most um, sites for discourse. So I think it's a unique um, situation where, again, the person who can say the most is talking to people who are the most open to hearing things, right? Um, and again, that's a perfect combination for discourse and change and thought and things like that. And what generally happens as a result is you have this opportunity to rethink everything you've ever thought. Like, that's, for me, like, comedy made me rethink everything in my life, like everything. I grew up in this kind of like lower middle class, like super religious family. I know it just oozes off of me, doesn't it? Um, and so, I mean, it was like borderline cult. Like it was culty. It was cult adjacent. So, I mean, you can only imagine what I was indoctrinated with, as a kid. And, around 10 or 11 years old when I really started, I mean, I always loved comedy, but I really started watching Saturday Night Live and, seeking out stand up comedy and things like that. Like everything they were saying was different than what I had been taught to believe. They made me rethink everything. And some things I changed my mind about. And some things I was like, no, you know what? I disagree with that. But like that comedy is an opportunity to rethink everything that you kind of took for granted or um, that you were taught to believe or whatever it is. And we can always be sort of evolving that way. We should always be, right? I say this all the time. You might even call it a credo, credo number 9. Um, you should all say at least once a day, I never thought of it that way. If you can be humble enough and open enough to the world around you to say, you know what, I never thought of it that way. Whatever it is, it could be something silly or something, you know, um, something with more significance. If you say that I think the world would be a better place if everyone said that at least once a day, genuinely, not just to say it, obviously. But we should always be in that state of, hey, I don't know at all. Open to different opinions and ideas and things like that, stuff I never known. Um, yeah, I'll do that. I'm looking to be entertained and enlightened by everything I do. That's an earlier credo. Um, I never thought of it that way. Should should say it once a day. Um, we don't typically. Um, but that's what comedy can do for everyone, is make us rethink the things we thought we knew or that we thought we believed or things like that. One of the beauties of this special, this Michael Che special, is like you can see him taking the comedic opportunity to think, learn, and grow, right? Um, he's he's being honest with us. He's trying to work through these really complicated concepts and ideas, right? He's also trying to work through this stuff. Um, and a couple of you mentioned the tranny bit, or the bit about trans people and naming them and all of that, and the way he negotiates that, I think is really interesting. It's, again, he's being honest, and he talks about that. Like, we have to have space to be wrong, you know, and well, I guess that should be preceded by we have to be able to admit that we're wrong, which nobody loves to do. Um, the worst thing, I mean, think about right now in our culture, the worst thing you can be is wrong, right? No one, nobody wants to publicly admit that they're wrong. Like, it's so difficult for people to either say that they were wrong or say, I don't know, that, I mean, we're just spinning into the the oblivion of stupidity as a result, because you know the truth has never been more obscured as a result of this. But I think you can see Michael Che in this special, like he's taking this comedic opportunity to think, learn, grow, work through these issues with, again, with an audience, with this group of audiences all over the place. And it's kind of this special as a whole is like this comprehensive look at what it means to be a comedian, right? It's funny, it's controversial without being offensive, right? It's thought provoking. He's humble enough to admit he doesn't have all the answers, which is kind of something I've been dancing around this whole time. Comedy is a search for clarity and truth, and he's searching, and you're gonna take some wrong turns along the way. I think we're just asking for the leeway to turn back, and I don't think it's difficult to tell the difference between somebody like Michael Che, who is actively, maybe he gets some things wrong, but it's in his own exploration of these things that leads to him being wrong and self-correcting and to be right about it. You can tell the difference between that and somebody who's just a bigot, who's, a racist and, is angry and spiteful and using it, using difference to separate and things like that. I think we can all tell when that's happening, or the difference between the two. But the culture at large lumps everybody together. So, like, one transgression and it's fuck you, you're canceled, you don't get to exist anymore. Right? Like, that's, like, we should be better at differentiating. We're choosing not to be, I guess. But that search for truth and clarity, that process that Michael Che is kind of going through with us in this special, it can be ugly, right? You can look like an asshole or sound like an idiot or whatever. But, you can't get through to the other side without pushing through that. So there's that. I think comedy offers, as I mentioned before, different perspectives, right? What happens when we're confronted with a perspective that's different than our own, right? What happens in those moments? Like now, and again, I think comedy has a better chance of understanding, of sides understanding the other than any other sort of pairing, right? Audience and comedian have a better chance of success with sharing perspectives, like genuinely sharing them. So, comedy is this constant test of what happens when we're confronted with perspectives different from ours, right? Do we immediately shut down? Are we open to it? Do we try to walk a mile in their shoes? Do we, empathy, Danny talked about empathy and that kind of thing. Like, can we be that way? I think, again, comedy's more conducive to that, for sure. It's way less combative and divisive. I never thought of it that way. I mentioned that, Creed 09. We need to see comedy as an opportunity for discussion, for change, for understanding, right? We just have to be open to it and acknowledge it as something more than just shits and giggles, something more than just jokes. Um, and I think Che does that really well, right? Um, and in that case, if someone is taking the opportunity, Michael Che in this case, he's taken the opportunity to, be funny but say something of import. It's our responsibility to sort of to listen, right? It's an audience's responsibility not to just say, "Oh, he's just a stupid comedian. Who cares?" Right? And to focus on, the punchlines more than, what sort of brought him to those punchlines. If you understand what I'm saying, um, every artist has the opportunity. Now, some don't take it, right? Some see comedy as an opportunity to make money. And in that case, you can go in and be like, okay, I'm not responsible to really think about what Gabriel Iglesias is saying or what Kevin Hart is saying. But when someone like Michael Che takes this opportunity to talk to you about something like of import, as I said, then we're sort of the audience becomes responsible to, I think, at least, you know, respond to it in kind. Um, so getting into more specific bits, I know I talked about a couple, but the whole thing on Black Lives Matter is just, a bunch of you mentioned, it's just so good. And mostly because he completely recontextualizes the movement, right? Just in that one section of his show, completely recontextualizes it. He kind of takes the vitriol out of it, the hatred, the bigotry. It's like that can cloud, you know, um, like productive discourse. And he's just like, yeah, it takes the air out of it, and then recontextualizes, and I just think makes you think about it from a different perspective, which is again like important to growth, personal growth, and growth of humanity. And there's this thread of humility, and humility is a big thing for me. I talk about it a lot because I think it's inherent to comedy, as I mentioned before, right? Um, Good comedians generally don't think they're better than anyone else. That's humility, right? Um, like thinking that you're better than everybody else, and being that kind of dude, that's not funny or interesting in any way, right? Um, the vulnerability of humility, right? And there's this coupled with humility is this idea that I don't have all the answers. Well, if you don't have all the answers, you're searching for the answers. You're searching for truth. Right? So it's inherent to comedy. And humility, as I mentioned before, is what's missing from our culture more than anything. And I think is a huge contributor to the divisiveness and the acidity of our culture at large, why everybody's just fucking butthurt about everything. Um, Nobody's wrong, right? Everybody's just pick a side, and we're right, you're wrong, and it's just exhausting. Always searching, never done. That's a comedian to me. Always searching for truth, and that search is never over, right? Um, so that. So anyway, a few of your comments. I mentioned a couple before, but Danny was talking about empathy. I thought that was really, analogous to what I was saying about humility. I think those two things go hand in hand, right? Empathy and humility. Um, so yeah, I liked that we kind of connected. Um, you kind of were talking about the same thing, um, basically, and giving some depth to the jokes, right? Not explaining jokes because that rarely works unless it's like an anti-comedy kind of thing, but explaining his position, right? Like where he was coming from, you know. Um, I said in a previous video, we're all latent everything. It just matters how we deploy it. Well, you can change how you deploy the things like your sexist side, your racist side, your straight, gay, black, Asian, white, whatever it is. You can, yeah, those things can change, but not without sort of realizing that, you know, we have them. Um, Song Yun mentioned coined a term. Well, I coined a term off of um, I I coined a term off of her comment. Um, Relatable severity, I thought was brilliant. Um, Her comment was, I enjoyed how he effortlessly intertwined the severity of racial and gender inequality with relatable and humorous connections. Like this idea, and I think it's a great way to sort of describe good comedians like Michael Che in this case, right? It's severity was the word that I really liked. Relatable severity, I think, really encapsulates it. Um, and I'll probably be using that in the future because this doesn't feel, like I said before, confrontational or argumentative, right? It's way more of a discussion. It almost feels like a therapy session in some cases. Um, so yeah, like relatable severity. I liked that. And then I mentioned Kellen's comment about stand up kind of being this living organism, right? There's an ebb and flow, there's peaks and valleys, and you know, you have to be adaptive um, and some of the things carry over from show to show, and it's yeah, it just sort of has this life of its own. Um, and then Emily mentioned that without being condescending, where was that? Yeah, he presents the meaning and importance behind the movement in a way that isn't condescending, right? Because these issues, when you're talking about issues like this, very easy to cross the line from being funny or contemplative into being preachy, and nobody likes being preached to. It just doesn't feel good. And there have been comedians who have crossed, like George Carlin's, you know, arguably the GOAT, but he had certain specials and bits where they weren't funny anymore. He was just lecturing us about this is what, and that, you know, that takes you out of it. I think that's um, so. Anyway, Emily was saying he's not being condescending. Like it's sort of a tightrope that comedians have to walk. You want to be passionate about these things that you're talking about. In many cases, they are things that are, you know, of significance to, you know, the culture at large. But as soon as you start, if you take the funny out and you just turn into somebody just screaming at people, which is not ideal, usually ineffective. So I think Emily's was right. Like Che, in this case, certainly walks that line um, with aplomb, right? He's not preaching, but he's, you know, he's also not downplaying any of it, right? I guess that would be the opposite, right? The two extremes would be preaching or sort of like making fun of it or downplaying the issues that we're talking about. I want to be somewhere in the middle there. All right, Michael Che, good job, guys. Keep commenting, keep watching these videos, and I'll see you guys soon.